Take the second day of notes on the protests. The bell ringer is about the first day. We typed it into Canvas chat. So hopefully you completed the second journal, which is whether or not women had achieved full equality. And you submitted the music assignment where you had to type 3 sentences about which is your favorite, which is your least favorite, and 3 sentences on connecting it to the material we've learned in the unit. So let's look at the second part of the protest here. You can find your notes on your Chromebook. Your Chromebook, please. So the consumer movement, the guy by the name of Ralph Nader. Nader is spelled Nader. Drew attention to the danger of products like automobiles. And he testified that over 1 million vehicles were unsafely made. Over 1 million. As a result, Congress eventually passed a traffic safety law. But Nader didn't stop there. He also ended up pushing for reform in foods, namely meats. The protest with consumerism was also concerned over the fact that people were buying too much, too much. And that kind of tied into the hippies that were trying to live a simpler lifestyle, and also the environmentalism. The fact that people buying lots of things, of course, contributed to trash buildup and depletion of natural resources. And really, the baby boomers were the first generation to grow up with a significant amount of goods and services at their disposal. And before that, previous generations didn't necessarily have that privilege. So they got to see what it was like when you had lots and lots of stuff, and possibly how wasteful it could be. The anti-war movement is another one, and this brought not only attention, because we already talked about this a little bit in the previous unit, but it also brought attention to the fact that the country put a lot of emphasis on defense. That's right. And we were spending more than ever before on the military. That was unusual because after wars, we usually significantly decrease our spending. But that didn't happen after World War II because of the Cold War. And so people were concerned about the enormous amount of money spent on the military, but also the dangers of things like nuclear weapons.
Yeah, no, because ours keep other people from launching theirs at us. So.
Yes? You can go down there. I don't know if he's available.
I just had to tell him.
But anyway, the Protests around this kind of thing had started originally at universities, where students participated in strikes. And while most of them were peaceful, obviously there were a few that did end up resulting in clashes with police. And probably the biggest way that people protested against all this was to dodge the draft. The draft had existed for a considerable period of time, not just during Vietnam. And so there were many famous people that ended up refusing. And over 100,000 would flee to Canada, the polar wasteland to the north.
Yeah, Canada's useless.
It is.
Other than Quebec. Quebec's not that.
They speak French there.
Yeah,
I mean, the falls aren't
it's
bad.
only all right. I didn't say it was good. I said it was all right. Bro, Canada should be useless on this thing, but we don't work for it. Why do you think there's so much? You're like, hey. Somebody.
And of course, there are also mass gatherings of people burning their draft cards, the card that proved that you had filed for the Selective Service.
Does that mean I can burn mine nowadays?
No, it's not a good idea.
Why not? They'll never know. You know, you like you pretty much get forced to sign. They haven't done it to me.
No, they haven't done it to me. I haven't done anything. Yeah, isn't that like a law you're supposed to?
Yes, you have to sign up for the draft. Yes.
Yeah, no one's asked me to sign it.
Where? Yes.
I'm not aware of the other
Last
system.
year they made.
I don't pay attention to that.
But anyway, the biggest event, of course, that got most of the attention and that we've already talked about before was the shootings that took place at Kent State. And instead of course, scaring away people from protesting, that just galvanized people to believe that perhaps we put too much emphasis on the military. But the long-term effect of Vietnam and the protests would be that Americans became incredibly leery of becoming involved in conflicts again. Not quite back to isolationism that existed before World War II, but Americans expected quick, clear victories. And that would continue the whole way up to, and that was the expectation at first in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But obviously, that did not happen, since we still have troops in Afghanistan.
No, but I read some of this.
And going along with this, of course, and connecting back to the civil rights, are some of the concerns over police action. Up until the 1960s and 70s, the expectation, of course, was that you did not necessarily have to have a lawyer represent you. There are many states that denied that right. There was also very inconsistent efforts with getting warrants in order to search people's property or seize things. And often a variety of brutal methods were used in order to force confessions from people.
Did you see that new TV show that come out with the suspect of like murder and perhaps gonna be also testifying for himself?
No, I did not see that.
It looks so stupid. I didn't do it.
But anyway, These concerns would result in a large amount of lawsuits that would eventually go the whole way to the Supreme Court and redefine exactly how suspects are treated in the eyes of the law. And some of these very things we, of course, expect are part of the norm today. For instance, people are read their rights. Before this time period, that did not happen. And of course, two of those rights are the right to remain silent and the right to have an attorney. And both those expectations were also not completely there before this time period as well. Well, that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll finish by talking about the Warren Court and some of the decisions that they made in order to rectify some of these problems.